Okay, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone. My name is Jeff Shuey. I'm a principal product manager at Oracle, and I'm today joined by Ken Siegel from Wiz, and we're going to talk about a new approach to cloud security. And for those that saw the invitation to the webinar, the long title is Utilizing Graph-Based Cloud Security to Optimize DevOps with OCI and Multi-Cloud Deployment. The idea and intent today is a technical deep dive to help customers and partners understand a little bit more about how Wiz is working with OCI and also other cloud providers to provide a better security profile for their deployment. Next slide, please. As with all presentations, we have to have the safe harbor statement from Oracle, and basically is, if you've read these before, it just basically says that information here might provide forward-looking statements, and there's risks and uncertainties that so don't take all of this as sage advice for your financial portfolios, but take it as sage advice for your technical deployments. Next slide. So a quick overview, this is what my team works on, and the team I'm part of works on is the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. The idea is it's a one-stop shop so that customers and partners can find solutions to solve their business and technical challenges. We've got about, actually closer to 435,000 customers now and about 20,000 sellers. The idea and intent is to help those customers find solutions that solve their business or technical needs, and for our Oracle sellers to be able to refer them. So solutions that are deployed there make it very easy for end customers to find it, and of course for our employees and coworkers to recommend them. The link is there on the page. Obviously, you'll get this presentation at the end, so you'll be able to see it, so you don't have to cut and paste it right now. Next slide, please. A quick overview of some of the partners we're working with are here, and I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail, but just to say what I like to say is that partners make more possible and faster. So of course, Oracle has a lot of solutions that do different things, but we also have a lot of partners that are building out solutions. Some are doing artificial intelligence, some are doing blockchain. We even have some partners that are taking some of our legacy Spark workstations and making them available to run on OCI because they run more efficiently. And so the point here is you can find examples of click to deploy or lead gen listings or BYOL listings on the marketplace, and this is just a quick example of some of those. But today we're going to talk about Wiz. So next slide, please. So I'm happy to say I was contacted by someone at Wiz just a few months ago, and in the 6+ months we've been working together, Wiz has already built out a couple of solutions and have already deployed at live customers. So they've jumped very quickly into building solutions that customers need to run their businesses. There is a bring your own license listing option available on the OCI marketplace today. The link is on this slide. And I do want to say congratulations to the Wiz team. They were recognized as the fastest growing software company in history. And the link is there too, but that's a huge milestone and achievement to hit $100 million in 18 months. So congratulations to the Wiz team on that. And there's also a blog available from the Wiz team that talks about how the OCI integration works, and it'll talk, and you'll hear more about this today, about the two deployment options as a SaaS option or an Outpost option. So you'll hear more about that today. So with that said, again, my name is Jeff Shuey. I'm on the Oracle team, and I'm here to support Wiz as a partner, but I'm also here to support our sellers, our customers, and other partners that are interested in talking to Oracle about partner solutions on the OCI marketplace. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ken Siegel from Wiz and kick it off to him. Ken, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the introduction. I'm a solutions engineer with Wiz. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years, but our story doesn't really start with me. It starts with our 4 founders. Our founders initially met in the Israeli defense, where they specialized in cybersecurity. And after they got out of the army, after Unit 8200, learning their craft, they decided to start a company called Adalom. And Adalom was a CASB product that Microsoft acquired about 7-8 years ago. And ultimately that team, the founding team and the developers, ran security for Microsoft Azure. So they intimately knew what customers were going through trying to identify security risks and visibility in a large cloud provider's service provider. And they decided that after their time at Microsoft, they wanted to create a new company. And so they created Wiz. And so in that about 18 months since I started, Wiz has become the fastest growing software company, not necessarily just because of these founders, but really what they've built and what the team has built. And we've addressed issues that have helped large enterprises and small customers alike that have adopted the cloud, whether they're migrating workloads into the cloud or they're optimizing and taking advantage of new services by modernizing, by using containers or serverless functions. We've been able to, by the strength of our product, help these customers at record pace. And today, over 25% of Fortune 500 companies are trusting Wiz for their cloud security. We have hundreds of other customers that are also leading brands worldwide. And that's where our story starts. So I thought today I'd talk about a real life example that happened last year in December. Log4Shell or Log4j, library used by so many people on-prem and in the cloud. And in cloud, it wreaked a lot of havoc. And one of the things, I was working with a customer who was trying to get a handle on things, and all they did is they asked their team, where do you have Log4j deployed? And basically all of their developers that had used Log4j, they tried to scramble and figure out where they had it deployed and where they had to deal with it. And if you're not familiar with Log4j, hopefully you are, and hopefully you have a handle on it now, but Log4j was an exploit in a library that effectively allowed attackers to gain access to almost any environment. And it's extremely exploitable. It was really easy to be able to send a user string into hitting a web server, having that web server call back out to an attacker's environment and effectively give the attacker access into the environment. So highly exploitable, and it was everywhere. And so if you're just asking like your organization to go find where it is across the clouds, that's a very difficult task because it could be in virtual machines, it could be in serverless functions, containers, infrastructure as code could be calling it. There are so many places it could be across multiple clouds. And so just getting a handle on where it is kind of the first step of the problem. The next step is, how do you identify where you actually have to deal with it? If you're using a vulnerability assessment to identify where you're at risk, you might have, like one customer I had, they had 1,500 instances of Log4j across their environment. And if you're telling your team, go address and patch 1,500 machines immediately because we're at risk, it just becomes a nightmare. And so really, if you're at risk, you need to understand where that Log4j is. Is it in a container? Do you have container security that's identifying it? Do you also have a machine that has external exposure to the internet where attackers could actually leverage it? And of those machines, whether you have virtual machines or containers, do you actually have any cloud entitlements or access to data from those machines? So being able to have the context of all of this information really tells you whether you're at risk. And to kind of shortcut the story for Wiz, this is what Wiz is able to identify, is that not only do you have Log4j, but in that customer that had 1,500 instances, Wiz was able to identify 30 instances that actually had a combination of risk. And 30 is something that is much more manageable. They can be immediately dealt with by the team to be able to address, and then continue addressing all of the other instances and starting with the protecting the environment from any new instances getting into the cloud. Other questions that come up that Wiz can help address are pretty simple questions, like, are you at risk of Log4Shell? Well, that one we just talked about. But do you have any databases exposed to the internet? Are keys and secrets stored securely? Do you have any roles being provisioned with right-size permissions, like not just full admin permissions, but actually what's necessary? And do you have any public web applications that are protected by a web application firewall? These are simple questions, but with the tooling before Wiz, these were very difficult answers to get at across multiple clouds or even a single cloud. In this cloud security landscape, there are many different tools. You probably recognize some of these, like cloud security posture management, a lot of these acronyms, workload protection, entitlements management, vulnerability management. Typically, these have been disparate tools, individual tools that have been used in on-prem environments that have been moved and adopted by cloud. And Gartner coined this term CNAP, and kind of the all-encompassing acronym, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And effectively, all the vendors in the space were saying, well, we have some components of this, and so we're a CNAP platform as well. And what really differentiates Wiz is that we're not just independent solutions kind of stitched together. We're actually one solution, one platform. And I think that's what Gartner intended, is to actually have a CNAP platform that has all of these functionalities, but in one platform. So it's not different architectures to manage. It's one place to get all of the context of this information from your cloud. Now, if we talk about cloud security as a partnership, about how we think about implementing security tools, if you've ever worked in an enterprise before, like I have, you've probably heard security is, everyone is responsible for security, not just the security team. And certainly we want to make sure that the infrastructure security teams have the tools that they need. So whether they're looking for vulnerabilities, or we have compliance auditors, or we're looking at identities, we want to make sure that those teams are addressing security challenges in the cloud. We also want to help cloud defenders, SOC teams, incident responders. So if there is a risk that we can prevent, we also want to understand, has anyone acted on those? So if there's a vulnerability like Log4j in the environment, has anyone tried to do anything with it? We want to make sure that we're providing that type of information. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that we're also looking early in the life cycle. So as developers are building applications, building code, whether they're developing code that's going into a virtual machine image or a container image, or infrastructure as code like Terraform plans or CloudFormation templates or Helm charts, we want to make sure that we're able to scan those things before they get to the cloud and enable those code builders, those application developers and DevOps teams, to be able to address issues well before it becomes a security risk. So how we do that, we're going to start with 3 steps. So step 1 is visibility. If you can't see it, obviously we can't identify risk. Step 2 is we need to understand context of potential signals to be able to prioritize ruthlessly. So many vendors talk about being able to prioritize. It's so important to understand in context of how you prioritize. And step 3 is we need to empower developers to be proactive. We don't want security to be a gatekeeper. We want to really enable all teams to be able to be proactive, and the owners who own these applications to be able to manage them early in the life cycle. So let's dive into step 1. Gain full visibility without bothering anyone. One thing the founders are trying to address, they are customer obsessed. We think of from a customer's perspective, since we are customers ourselves and that we've all been in the customer's shoes. We really want to understand, how do we connect to a cloud very quickly without the deployment headaches, without having a narrow view of the environment. We need full visibility to multiple cloud platforms. If you're operating on Oracle's cloud today, the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, we want to be able to connect in just a few minutes and then get value by having complete visibility across the platform, across virtual machines, containers, everything that's in the cloud and what relates to what. And we do that by effectively providing read-only permissions where we can connect Wiz to the cloud, and the ability to take snapshots of virtual machines. So we look at the architecture here. There are a couple pieces. One, from the control plane, we need to be able to scan everything about the cloud, the configuration, as well as any Kubernetes clusters if you're running those. We need to be able to understand where you might have networking or identities that are in a Kubernetes cluster and layer those together, as well as any platform services, things like databases that you might be using, or storage or serverless functions. We can do all of that through APIs. And on the data plane, which historically had been more of an agent-based deployment for most tools, with Wiz can be done agentlessly. And I mentioned taking snapshots of virtual machines, and that's exactly what we're doing. Is we're taking a virtual machine snapshot of the system disk, by calling the API, we're able to mount that system disk or the snapshot of the system disk in place. So we never have to copy any data. We can see every file configuration, everything about that virtual machine. Even if you're running containers on top of it, we can see those container images and configurations as well. So when we say full visibility to your cloud by just connecting Wiz, we can connect with limited privileges and have full exposure to the environment. We can also scan container registries. So if you have any container images there, we can scan those as well as your serverless functions. Step 2, use context to prioritize ruthlessly. I mentioned vendors often say that they prioritize, they reduce noise. This is so critical to be able to do this, but the way that Wiz does this differently than other solutions is by providing context. The reason that context is so important is often you have security teams that don't have the cloud understanding that application developers do. And so if you're just relying on things like a vulnerability scanner and you're passing vulnerability scans down to developers to fix them, I can just imagine the eye rolls from an application developer saying, you know, this isn't even an issue. It's not in production, or there are other reasons why it's not a problem. And so it's super important that security has all of the visibility to context of public exposure. If you're running a container, virtual machine, if you have exposed secrets or admin permissions, or if you have a workload that has access to storage or SQL databases, effectively looking at it from an attacker's perspective of what's the impact of that exposure. That's really important. And we want to make sure that security is enabled with the capabilities to be able to see that context. Let's look at how we're able to determine context differently than historical solutions. Historically, we've looked at security in terms of configuration settings, and whether you have 20 settings that you need to adhere to for compliance or for good hygiene in your environments, you're always looking at maintaining independent configuration settings. And one great example of that is if you have a virtual machine that has a public IP address and you're using that configuration setting as a way to determine if the VM has public exposure, internet exposure, you might run into a couple of problems. One problem could be that a machine can have a public IP address, but there might not be an internet gateway. So there's no actual routing. And so you end up with a false positive of a virtual machine has a public IP, but it's not actually exposed. Another case could be you have a virtual machine that doesn't have an IP address. However, it's exposed through a load balancer. So the load balancer itself has the public IP, and it translates that to the private IP down to the virtual machine. And so if you're just relying on that configuration setting of a public IP, it's really a shallow analysis because there are multiple ways that there's public exposure. So it's super important to understand that context, because if you're looking at individual configuration settings like this, you're probably not going to identify risk. It might be good for compliance and good hygiene, but for identifying risks from an attacker's perspective, we need to understand the context. So how we do that, in the case with Log4j, which is a vulnerability that could be a library that's on a virtual machine or a cloud workload. If you're using the vulnerability scanner, you might find it across, in the case that I mentioned, 1,500 resources with one customer. That gets you started. But the next point is, what other context is there? You might have workload context, like if you have an exposed secret, like an SSH key that could be used by an attacker to move laterally, or you could have a cloud access key that gives access to other cloud accounts. The cloud access key also could have privileges that give access to databases or storage. There could be internet exposure. This could be a web server, or it could be a database server. We need to understand the context of what this machine is. And from a business context, we really need to understand, is this production? Is it running an e-commerce application? Do customers actually access it now? Is there sensitive data exposed? And has anyone actually acted on that? So once we identify the risk and all of the context of the configuration, we also need to understand, has anyone acted on it? So we need to ingest all of this context. And for Wiz, this is what Wiz is providing as an alert. Instead of having individual alerts for internet exposure or what we think might be, Wiz is actually tracking down all of the firewall rules, routing rules, understanding how things are exposed. So we actually know the effective exposure. And we understand there's a vulnerability, we understand secrets and more. So when we're passing this over to security teams, they can understand the context. And we also provide this information for DevOps and application owners. So everyone is really on the same page of understanding how to prioritize and understand if you do have 30 resources that have all of this context, all of this risk, those are the ones that we can prioritize and focus on. And step 3, we need to empower developers to be proactive. We sometimes call this democratizing security. And we actually have a really interesting customer that's been with Wiz just about as long as I have, about 1.5 years, where they had a huge investment in cloud, but the security team was really holding them back from being able to take advantage of operating at the speed of deploying applications in the cloud. And the problem was security just didn't have a handle on visibility. And so they were really meticulous of trying to identify if there was any risk and taking a lot of time to identify it. This customer implemented Wiz. It took them about a half an hour to connect into their cloud and be able to have full visibility. The security team was just blown away by what they were able to see in terms of visibility, but also when Wiz is able to surface risks based on the context of the risk, security was able to actually put that in the hands of developers. And now in this customer, they have over 100 application development teams. Each has access to Wiz to be able to log in and see their own issues. So with role-based access controls and the ability to scope views to each team can see their issues, understand where they sit. And instead of being a gatekeeper and kind of passing alerts over the fence, security can actually enable teams and actually monitor and help when there are potential issues with anyone, any of those cloud builder teams that have potential risks in their environments. One of the ways that Wiz helps is when Wiz identifies an issue, we really humanize risks. And what I mean by that is, if I think of cloud, especially with security teams that are used to on-prem and they are transitioning to security. I was working with a security team that is responsible for network security, and now they've been tasked with cloud security. And often we see this where maybe they don't have the context of cloud or the deep understanding that application developers do. And so when we talk about humanizing risk, we really need to provide this evidence in a way that's consumable by anyone looking at it. And it could be the security team. It could also be the application developers or line of business. So whoever owns these resources need to really understand exactly what happened, why they need to care, what the impact of that is. And we need to show the evidence in a way that is consumable by anyone. And we also need to provide some recommended remediation. So it's not enough to just say, here's the issue, but we also need to provide some guidance of, if there's public exposure, here's how you can remediate that. Or if there's a vulnerability, we can tell you exactly what command even to run to update maybe that application or that operating system, wherever that vulnerability is found. If it's a permissions issue, we can show how we could reduce permissions and right-size the permissions that are actually needed. And so it's all of that context which Wiz is able to provide in a way that really enables the security team. And what actually ends up happening is security maintains credibility, and application development teams don't have that contentious relationship with security that they often have. It's really teams working together is what we're after. And that's been really effective using Wiz. Now, in terms of the tools that Wiz provides to those cloud builders, one of the things we do is we can connect to the cloud environments. And so we see full visibility to the cloud estate, but we also can integrate with the build pipeline. And this is super important for when developers are actually building code and trying to develop their applications. Instead of waiting for production to actually scan something and then kick down an alert saying, hey, you're running the wrong version, or you have this configuration issue that you need to resolve because now you have this complex risk, developers can actually identify vulnerabilities using, maybe they're using the wrong library, or certain application is not running the right version. They can identify that in the build pipeline. So instead of waiting till the end and hammering those developers, we can actually see that really early in the process. Developers can actually use these tools to actually understand where they have risks without actually having to interact with security at all. So it really enables the team instead of being kind of that, having that contentious relationship. Production can also be monitored the same way using the same policies. And this is really critical for a CNAPP platform, is that in your build pipeline, if you're using a separate tool to scan for vulnerabilities or secrets or configuration issues that is separate from production, you're still running into the same problems, because you might have developers scanning with one tool. They might resolve any issues, but then once you get into production, if you're using a separate tool with separate policies, you might identify other issues, and then you're still going to have security go back and kick those issues back to the developers. So we want to make sure that with a CNAPP platform, especially with Wiz, you're able to do this across your production and build pipeline with the same policies that apply. We can also integrate with existing tooling. So Wiz has integrations with dozens of other products. Most commonly, we see things where we're notifying about issues using email or Slack. It's also important to track these issues in tools like Jira, ServiceNow, and there are other tools that we could use for auto remediating. We might be calling playbooks and triggering serverless functions if that's something that you'd like to be able to do. Typically with an auto remediation, especially if it's a hands-off type of auto remediation, then these are usually binary settings that aren't going to break any applications, but certainly help maintain compliance. But we also can provide remediation with one-click remediation, so we can have someone look at issues, or we could provide remediation guidance, whatever is appropriate for the situation. And I mentioned how we can divide the environments, divide the views for each team. It's so important for everyone to be responsible for security. Like we talk about enterprises maintaining that vision of everyone's responsible for security. Well, with Wiz, everyone can log into Wiz. We want to make sure that we're providing information that doesn't mean someone has to learn a new way of doing things. It's very easy to consume that information from Wiz, and that's really what we're trying to drive for. So again, the 3 points to help cloud builders accelerate, adopt cloud, modernize their applications. First is frictionless visibility. We can make sure that we're providing visibility to the entire cloud without having any agents. We don't have to worry about any conflicts, and we can even see workloads that are offline. So having that visibility to the entire cloud with just a few minutes of configuration is really important. And then there's no other configuration that customers actually have to do on their side. All of the prioritization and context of understanding where risks are is really curated by our threat research team, building in policies and constantly updating them to identify the latest types of attacks and ways that the cloud can be used to leverage those attacks. It's super important to be able to prioritize those and have a software platform that does that for you in a way that the third step is to be able to democratize security so that all teams actually can gain access to that prioritized content and context so they can actually remediate very, very quickly. So that's the brief overview about Wiz. We're going to be at Oracle Cloud World in Las Vegas, October 17th to the 20th. We're going to have demo stations available, solutions engineers, architects, and product managers will be there. Come out and see us if you're going to be there. If not, you can contact me directly on LinkedIn or email, or you can go to our website, sign up for a demo. We'd love to share what we've done so far with Wiz. And maybe at this point, we can kick it over to some questions.
Thank you, Ken. That was great. Obviously you covered a lot of stuff, and hopefully folks were able to follow along and understand what Wiz is and does. I didn't see questions pop up in the Q&A or chat panel, but one of the things that we talked about was how Wiz works in a multi-cloud environment. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, great question. I talk about multi-cloud a lot. Some customers are in one cloud, but if you are in multi-clouds, Wiz operates in an interesting way. Is Wiz actually normalizes data across clouds. So when we connect to a cloud, it takes a few minutes, and effectively it's a similar process to create a connector for Wiz that has read-only permissions, the ability to take a snapshot and then remove the snapshot after about a minute or so of analysis. And then we have visibility to each cloud. The other thing that Wiz is doing is by normalizing the data, we can see a virtual machine is a virtual machine across clouds, or a container is the same, a network interface is the same. So when we're asking questions like, where do I have log4j and where do I have this combination of risk, we don't necessarily have to be specific about each cloud. We can be specific about certain things in each cloud that only occur for each one, but we can ask these general questions so we can understand things like public exposure, and we don't put the burden on customers to really understand how to craft very complex queries to understand where they have public exposure. Customers can just ask questions like, what virtual machines are accessible from the internet? And Wiz will go through all of the work of understanding how things are effectively exposed on any cloud platform. And we do that across identities and secrets to really understand where there's potential risk across all clouds.
Okay, good. And it's, as I know we've talked about, and a lot of folks that might be listening know this already, one of the big initiatives for Oracle in FY23, which we're right in just after Q1 now, is about multi-cloud. So we realize that customers don't live on one cloud, and they have solutions deployed across a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. Another question we talked a little bit about, and I think you covered it already, but it was just the overall difficulty, and sometimes you actually had it in your slides, the naivete that unfortunately encroaches in the security space. Did you want to touch on that a little bit more about how Wiz helps end customers, both from a C-level executive to understand what's going on in their environment, and obviously specifically on the technical side, so the chief security officer or the VP of engineering, and how Wiz helps both the technical team address their technical issues that might be popping up, and also how they communicate that, and how Wiz surfaces information so that it can be reported upon easily.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I joined Wiz, we had a lot of capabilities for surfacing risks and providing some dashboards and some reporting compliance functions. And one thing that we recognized is we needed that high-level quick snapshot of where there's risk, because there are so many high-profile breaches or vulnerabilities where it might even be on the news that an executive hears something about a vulnerability and they want to know exactly immediately, are we exposed? And so Wiz has actually built in a dashboard called Threat Center that allows us to quickly identify if any high-profile vulnerabilities or cases are actually exposed in the environment. And it's really interesting when we go into showing that to customers. It really helps when an executive wants to get that information at their fingertips. They can go into Threat Center, quickly identify what the issue is, and our threat research team actually builds in a lot of documentation to help customers really understand what those threats are. If there's a specific vulnerability like log4j, the documentation shows exactly what the problem is, what the risk is. But we also can drill right from Threat Center down into the findings, and if there are any critical issues in the environments in their cloud, across clouds, wherever there might be a specific case. So it makes it very easy to just, if you're logging into Wiz, you can see that immediately. And then on the reporting capabilities, kind of how teams are communicating, we can certainly report executive summary reports on a regular basis that can be scheduled. We can also provide compliance reports. You could also log into Wiz, of course, and see any of that compliance information across compliance frameworks. And then it's also super important to be able to integrate with existing tools. So if you have teams that are using Jira or ServiceNow for tracking issues, we have bidirectional integration with those tools to be able to create issues. If there is a new potential risk that Wiz has identified, we can go ahead and create an issue in those tools so everyone can be tracking the issues the same way that they normally have in their existing processes.
Okay, that's great. That's I know you covered a little bit of that, or actually quite a lot of that in your presentation, but I think it bore repeating. So one, I don't know if it's the last one, but one other question that I would think people would be interested in is deployment options. So I know there are sort of two primary options, either SaaS or Outpost, and can you dive into those a little bit more?
I'd love to. And I'm glad you asked because I didn't cover the deployment options in my presentation. We have customers that can take advantage of our SaaS service by having us connect directly to their cloud. Everything is contained in our privileges. But we have some customers that are regulated or have highly sensitive information, like government entities, or we have healthcare or financial services companies that want to make sure that anything that's touching their workloads, anything that's scanning those workloads, is actually self-contained. So Wiz Outpost is a mechanism where we can actually split up our roles. So the role that's actually touching those workloads and doing that scanning, we can spin up our scanning cluster within the customer's cloud account. So in their subscription where they have their resources, all of the scanning can happen directly in their account. So it's self-contained. And then the only thing that's passed back to the Wiz service is the metadata, the information about whether there's risk. So it really helps us deploy to any type of customers, whether it's a smaller customer that isn't as concerned or not as regulated, or those highly regulated instances where we want to make sure that we're adhering to those regulations and making sure that all of that data is very protected and sensitive in that customer's cloud.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's important because one of the things I really like about Wiz is you don't dictate how the customer has to deploy. You give them a choice. If they want to deploy as SaaS, that's their choice. If they only want to deploy part of their solution as SaaS, that's their choice. And from the OCI side, where they're running, basically they might be running the Wiz Outpost deployment, it makes it, again, their choice. And I think, as you talked about it in the presentation, is security is, at Oracle, security is job one. It's literally our OCI platform. If you talk to or hear Clay McGurk speak, he talks about security is job one, and everything else, not that it trickles down from there, but it starts there. And obviously every company needs to make sure their governance, risk, and compliance needs are covered first and foremost. And like I said, the one thing I really like about Wiz is you give the customer the choice of how they want to deploy without telling them. You just say, you want to do SaaS? Fine. If you want to do Outpost, that's fine. And I suppose if they want to do a combination of them, that's fine too.
That's right.
I think that those are the main questions that I think we probably wanted to cover. I haven't seen any pop up in the chat window. One thing I did make a note of is, and you already said it, is that Wiz will be at Oracle Cloud World in Las Vegas in about a month. And if Oracle sellers, if customers or partners are going to be there, please find time and schedule time to meet with the Wiz team. I also put a note in the chat window if somebody wants to see a demo of how Wiz works. It's incredibly easy to set up. It's literally right on the top of the Wiz web page. It takes a few seconds to get set up, and the Wiz team is happy to walk you through that. And that can be everything from understanding the business requirements and obviously deep dive into the technical requirements too. So are there any parting comments you want to leave, Ken?
I really appreciate the time. I think Oracle's been a great partner for us. A number of these customers have deployments in Oracle, and it was actually surprised me a little bit about how not just the existing brands have been using Oracle Cloud, but also new internet-based companies are using Oracle Cloud. So I've been pleasantly surprised. So I really appreciate being part of this. Yeah, thanks for the time.
Well, thank you, Ken, and also for the folks behind the scenes who you might have seen, Oran on the technical side of the Wiz team is also behind the scenes ready to answer questions as needed. So thanks to Ken and Oran. I think Brendan was also there. So thanks to the Wiz team, not just for doing this presentation, but also for your partnership. There's a lot more we can do. As I mentioned, we've got 435,000 customers. I can't say they all need Wiz. Of course, you might say they all need Wiz, but I can't say they all need Wiz today. But the idea is helping get them exposed to what Wiz is and does, and of course, ultimately making sure that their security needs are met and ideally exceeded. So thanks again to the Wiz team, and I will leave it at that. Thanks, everyone.